Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and hello everybody. My name is Amir and today I would like to talk about Iran's willingness to detonate a nuclear device. A few a few days ago, Pepe Escobar confirmed that President Masoud Pezeshkian spoke to Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan. he he stated how, quote, if American threats persist, we, Iran, should conduct the detonation of a nuclear device on Iranian soil, executed not as an act of war, but as an irreversible sovereign demonstration of capability to control escalation dominance, end quote. Larry Johnson has confirmed this call as well. Pakistan relayed this information to the US on the 29th, and this explains why President Donald John stopped ordering or even spoke of any attacks on Iran that way. And in the days and in the days and days later, he and last week he stopped threatening Iran altogether. This is an extremely important development, as what President Masoud Pezeshkian said has come to pass. A few hours ago, not only did Israel bomb Beirut, which was a red line, but it had also launched an attack on Iran together with the US. So far, the damage on Iran has yet to be completely assessed. Iran retaliated with strikes on both Israel and US bases in Saudi Arabia. Yemen too joined, launching its own attacks on Saudi Arabia and Israel. This also means that there is a high likelihood that Yemen will close the Bab al-Mandab to any Israeli and Western shipping. But going back to the nuclear device Iran was willing to detonate, Israel's attack has all but guaranteed this possibility. I am certain that within this month we will be seeing serious preparations, if not the actual event. And given that Israel is a nuclear powered state, regardless of what it may state, Iran's ability to prove that it has a nuclear weapon now will only guarantee its safety in the future. It will also make any such attacks like the one that had happened a few hours ago, and the ones that had happened this year and last year, incredibly dangerous. It also means that Iran has had help in developing its nuclear program with the thanks to assistance from other nuclear states such as Pakistan, the DPRK, Russia and China. This also means that other countries who are not as yet willing or able to create their own nuclear devices may seek to do so, as nuclear weapons, they would contend, would be the only guarantee for national autonomy and the safety of their citizens, in light of an ever increasingly impotent UN that has failed to reverse the Palestinian Holocaust. It has been years since it first started in October 2023, and so far there have been no serious sanctions on Israel from the UN or any other international body. Therefore, therefore, the the therefore, Iran pursuing and finally putting such weapons into production and use is the only guarantee for its safety. I would also like to add that my previous statements that the US would be housing troops in Poland was now unfounded. As it turns out, there is no status of forces agreement with Poland for the deployment of 5,000 US troops, nor is there any congressional budget allocation for this. Regardless of what President Donald John might be saying, there simply is no budget in this year for the allocation, nor has Poland agreed to any such transfer of forces. Once again, the American president has been blowing hot air just to satisfy his own base and to satisfy his critics in the West, especially the ones in Europe who continue to see the US as drifting further and further away from their area of influence and closer to the Far East and Southwest Asia. Additionally, though, the US has signaled that it is willing to station more nuclear weapons in Europe. Now, Alexander Mercurius has labeled this as disastrous, dangerous, and he suspects that it has elements of a bluff. And I agree with this. There is a serious chance that the mere buildup of nuclear weapons in Europe will risk a nuclear conflagration that planners within the US will not have adequately appreciated, even if they do suppose that it is meant to deter Russia. They will swiftly find that it will be counterproductive. The only way to deal with nuclear weapons buildup, after all, is to sit down out of goodwill and with competent delegates discuss how denuclearization ought to take place. We are at a time when the New START Treaty has already expired this year. Therefore, there is no legal limit to which the US can build and maintain its nuclear arsenals. Neither is Russia bound by this agreement. Neither is Russia bound, since the agreement is no longer valid. One thing this deployment of nuclear weapons does do is that it increases the chances of drawing the US ever closer into the SMO, since the US has been unable to utilize its conventional might to maintain Ukraine. It has now been forced to resort to utilizing nuclear weapons and, through Ukraine, terrorist attacks like the one at Starobelsk. The US is increasingly running out of room. It has faced multiple losses in both men and material in Southwest Asia and in Ukraine. It's been forced into withdrawing THAAD and Patriot missile batteries from the Republic of Korea and other places, hoping to make up for the shortfall in Israel and in Israel and the rest of the GCC. However, supplies that would have been useful have already been expended since 2022 in Ukraine, and the rest of the missile launchers continue to be spread out across the world. The US itself has a dwindling quantity in its own arsenals, and it simply does not produce these missiles and their launchers in the quantities needed for these kinds of military operations. These launchers and their missiles, after all, were built with profit in mind and not for national defense. There is one thing that the US is doing to at least try to alter the balance of power in Southwest Asia. Previously, it was something of a mystery as to why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that he would no longer seek US military assistance. Now we know the answer. It lies in the NDAA's Section 224, titled United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. According to it, there will be an executive agent within the Pentagon who will oversee military cooperation. This office will have statutory powers and is not accountable to Congress, only to the Secretary of Defense and, implicitly, the Prime Minister of Israel. The areas of cooperation will include unmanned systems, counter-unmanned systems, anti-tunneling, air and missile defense, autonomous systems, directed energy weapons, biotechnology, cyber defense, electronic warfare, EW, network integration and data fusion, defense industrial base co-production, etc. Note how all of these areas are quite specific to Israel's needs, especially anti-tunneling, air defense, and autonomous systems. Defense industrial base co-production is also important, given that Israel's production facilities are above ground, whereas the ones in Iran and Russia are deep below ground. Network integration is also noteworthy because it allows the US to transfer military data to Israel. However, Israel is not obligated to return the favor. This level of intelligence sharing is unheard of in NATO, and it strongly implies that the US is willing to prioritize Israel over NATO to the point that NATO's data could end up being Israel's data. This all leads us to the question of Turkey. Turkey will no doubt be forced to choose a side. It will be forced to either go it alone or to go along with Israel and its Abraham Accords. But that option is also not a guarantee, as many Israeli politicians have been calling for an attack on Turkey. This, of course, is also a reply to US public opposition to the Palestinian Holocaust via restructuring. There will now be there will no longer be any yearly congressional approval of $4 billion in military assistance, as all the military assistance will now be handled via the Pentagon. This also harmonizes with some of the this also harmonizes with the current congressional purges, such as Thomas Massey and uh, Thomas Massey, who have been ejected due to their willingness to continue releasing the Epstein files. Another interesting note is a development on the EU and its trade with China. Arno Bertrand recently explained how the EU is drafting a new anti-China legal framework that would make Chinese products, despite their affordability and competitiveness, illegal. EU citizens would simply not be EU citizens as such will be kept in the dark. This is called the overcapacity instrument, and here of course overcapacity is something of an innuendo, since the EU produces too little and is reliant heavily on imports from China, something that the Chinese government and economy is willing to provide. However, this legal mechanism will allow the EU to block Chinese goods and therefore Chinese competition across entire sectors of the economy. Worse, there is almost no media coverage about it. China responded on May 16 China responded to this overcapacity instrument on May 16th by declaring these measures as, quote, improper extraterritorial jurisdiction, end quote. Such tools will suppress Chinese enterprises, and Chinese banks are now compelled into cooperating with EU investigations into in Chinese with EU investigations. But doing so will give these investigators unreasonable access to information that is irrelevant to their investigations. The Ministries of Commerce and Justice of the People's Republic of China have ordered that no person or entity be allowed to partake in these investigations. China also states that it hopes that the European Commission reverses course on these counterproductive policies before it is too late. As I have stated before, the EU is in a very serious bind. On the one hand, it governs Europe, a place that is and has always been rather energy deficient, especially in hydrocarbons. It has not developed much, if at all, in terms of renewables or hydroelectric power, during the 21st century, Germany had had demolished almost every nuclear power plant it had, leaving only France as the primary user of nuclear power in the EU. Additionally, it relies on China for imports and to bolster competitiveness in its own economy, which itself has not been very competitive owing to the shortage of fuel and increasing costs of important raw materials due to sanctions on Russia, a major market for many EU member states. The EU ought to do better. It ought to improve relations with Russia and China, and it ought to stay away from any pretenses of values, given that it wholeheartedly supports Israel, and yet it continues to do so. It operates like a captive market. It operates like a proxy, and it operates at the whims of the United States. It has stated repeatedly that it will continue to arm, fund, and equip Ukraine, despite it having no means to do so. And yet it will continue to do, and yet it remains stubborn. All I can say is that if the EU continues on this downwards trajectory, the chances of it deteriorating and even breaking apart are quite high. We might see such an incident this century, the EU breaking apart. And if it does so, the member states will be forced into a new reality. They can no longer collectively bargain either amongst themselves or the world at large. They will have to develop their own foreign policies, their own economic policies, and their own systems of governance. They will be forced to honor their promises to their people, despite whatever infiltration the US has. Inevitably, the EU cannot be saved. It simply does not have the power to do so. It has no fuel, it has no food either. Now it will be forced into ever increasingly weak positions. Finally, I want to end by stating that I will also be covering SPIEF, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Right now, all I can say is that so far the events have gone without a hitch. Yes, there was a Ukrainian attack on an oil installation not far from the airport, but the damage was minimal. And any attacks that Ukraine dares to attempt during this forum will inevitably be the cause of further chaos within Ukraine, particularly in Kiev. We have already seen strikes, including an Oreshnik strike on Kiev, and furthermore, the Russian government strongly seems to be of the opinion, together with the Russian public, that they must wrap up the SMO. It has already been 4 years since it began on the 22nd of February 2022, and the public at first was quite ambivalent in certain areas. Yes, the closer to the east they were, there was much greater understanding and appreciation of this situation in Ukraine and the necessity of the SMO. But the rest, almost in the entire 140 million people in Russia, did not seriously consider the SMO nor its implications. However, Ukraine's new strategy in employing drones in terrorist attacks, and the Starobelsk college attack in particular, has finally woken the population up to a new reality. Ukraine will not stop. No matter the gains on the battlefield, Ukraine will continue to attack soft targets because those are the only targets it can hope to attack without serious resistance. And even if it does meet resistance, it will be using drones. And even if it does lose people in these operations, the losses will simply be covered up. The operations are quite small. The one in Starobelsk, for instance, was carried out by 16 drones and no people. So the losses on the Ukrainian side in the immediate clash were quite limited. However, Russia and the Russian people do not see it that way. This protracted operation will finally be reaching a climax. And this time, the climax is not aimed at merely the battlefield, but it is aimed, as the recent strikes have shown, and at Kiev itself. Currently, Russia continues to advance across the battlefield. And this summer, we could be seeing gains far that are far, far beyond the expectations of the West. A very prominent example is the possible capture of the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. If captured, it would mean the complete liberation of the Donetsk Oblast, therefore securing the entire Donbass. And once it is secured, Russian forces will be free to operate in Sumy and Zaporozhye oblasts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching and listening. Please subscribe and like if you found this video to be informative, and share it with others. I look forward to reading your comments both here on YouTube and on X. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.